Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel if you've been here before. This is a channel where I talk about Pokemon cards. Usually I'm talking about artwork, but today I'm actually just looking at vintage cards, and the subject of today's video is this set, base set 2. And the reason I wanted to cover this, which I've never bothered to cover before, is I wanted to talk about it in the context of how I perceive it to be Pokemon's first major error in marketing, and why it was not a good idea, and why it actually damaged the sales of Pokemon and led to an onward decline that happened over the next couple of years. So what I'm going to do is bring the camera in, because this is way too far out. How am I going to do this? Bear with me. It'll judder, because that's just how it goes. Yeah, that's good enough. We can look at the cards. Yeah, that works. Okay, so what did I want to say about base set 2? Well, let's put it in context. So there are 130 cards in this set, and it is the fourth set that came out in English, released in February of 2000. Now, we'd had base set, we'd had jungle and fossil, and all of a sudden they gave us a reprint set, which was technically less than a year after most people had started buying base set, because base set had come out, although it had been released in English at the beginning of 1999, it wasn't until later in the early summer, really, that it took off. So the mood was very strange back then. If you were there, you'll remember what it felt like. Pokemon was the big thing. Every kid needed to have it. And initially it was a case of every kid just needing a few of the cards. And then people realized you could collect the set, and they needed the whole set. I remember, this is a silly little anecdote perhaps, but I remember picking my nephew up from school one day. He was about 7 or 8 at the time, I think. And I'd bought him some Pokemon cards, and I was talking to him, and he was telling this little boy who was in his class that his uncle, me, had got all 102 cards in the base set. And this kid was like wide-eyed staring and went, "Oh my God, that means you get to meet the Queen," which was the sort of level of crazy that children had around this set. They thought it was just so important to collect Pokemon cards that by getting the whole of base set, you had a royal invitation somehow, which just struck me as so bizarre. Anyway, anecdote aside, base set was huge in 1999, and they reprinted it and reprinted it, printed it and printed it. And yes, there was a fourth print as well with the different dates on them, but whatever. They printed that into oblivion, and you could get base set everywhere. Even though it's kept selling out, they just had more and more and more of it. And then we had these two sets, Jungle and Fossil, which expanded on the original 102, and they kept the excitement up. I remember not being as excited about Jungle and Fossil. They felt a little bit... They're quite small sets. Very few trainer cards, as I remember, but they just didn't... They were expansions, I guess. They didn't feel like a full main set like the base set was. And we had then this released. Now, you have to compare what was happening in English in February 2000 with what was happening in Japan, and why this felt such a disappointment, because by February of 2000, when this set came out, Japan had already moved into Generation 2. They'd already got Neo Genesis, and they'd got the second generation of video games, and they'd had Team Rocket, and they'd had the 2 gyms with all the gym decks, and they'd had the Southern Islands and the intro pack, and they'd had the vending series, and so many promos. Whereas in English, all we'd had was the base set, the 2 little sets of Fossil and Jungle, and we'd had 7 promo cards up to that point, or 7 plus a few other sort of, things like the Poke Tour, Pikachu, and... there were a couple of other little, there were about 10 promo cards out there that you could collect. So we were really shafted with this set because it was just oh, you've bought our product en masse. Why don't you just buy the same cards all over again? And the psychological impact of that on collectors was quite powerful, because I remember feeling that they were just milking us, really. I wanted new cards. I didn't want the cards that I just bought 6 months earlier. And okay, these are Cosmos holofoils, and that's slightly different, but they felt less than the base set. There's no first editions. There's obviously no reverses at this point. But it just felt really disappointing. And I believe that it really put a lot of people off the whole thing. Certainly the sales of base set 2 seemed to be very much lower. They lingered on the shelves forever. For a couple of years afterwards, there were just boxes and boxes of base set 2 knocking around. You could easily get them, and quite often they were on sale. I used to buy vast amounts of this stuff. So it really was a marketing disaster, in my opinion. And it set the stage for a sort of disappointment in collecting that was then echoed a couple of years later when they released the Legendary set, which I know people now look back on the Legendary set and think, oh my goodness, it's such an amazing set with those sparkle firework reverses. But at the time, that wasn't actually the vibe. The time was, oh my God, they're just printing these bloody things for a third time and making them look utterly ridiculous. I mean, I still don't like the reverses in Legendary Collection. I know people do now. Looking back in hindsight, they've grown to appreciate them. But at the time, they just looked awful. They looked like the sort of tacky things that were fake cards that kids had in the playground that somebody had printed up somewhere or had imported from China. So the Legendary Collection, I think, was a really bad move. But this was a really bad move as well. So just to run through the cards very quickly, because, I mean, these are all cards that everyone knows. Back to front, these are all the classic cards. Obviously, nearly all of them are by either Ken Sugimori or Mitsuhiro Arita. There are a couple of, I think, Nishidas and Keiji Kinabuchis. Actually, I'll bring the camera out again and we'll have a proper look at the set from a distance. Sorry, maybe it was a bad mistake to pull the camera in, so bear with me. Try and get the whole page on at the same time. Let's see, we can do this. Right, so these are all classic cards that everyone knows back to front, I should think, if you've been in the hobby for any length of time. If you look at the diversity of art compared to what we've got going on now in this incredible age of Scarlet and Violet, it's just a completely different ballgame. They're very, very, I mean, obviously lots of Sugimori, stock art over a very boring background. Even Arita was doing not a great deal of detail, except in a few of them. I mean, if you look at his licky tongue, there is effort being put into the background there. But quite often, they're incredibly dull cards, although now, with time, they have become iconic images. And we know these cards very well. So this is base set 2. And it really doesn't, I don't think it holds any value particularly. It's certainly much less valuable than either Legendary Collection or the original base set cards, which... and then we've got this. This was the only promo that came with the set, or different card, an extra card, which is the Wizards logo stamp on the War Turtle. So that was the set, and it was a big set because it was basically nearly all of... I think there's a few cards missing, but it was nearly all of Jungle, as well as base set all over again. So that is base set 2. Let me have a look. I'm going to have a look at one of the Charizards I've got, just see how they've held up over time. I haven't pulled it out of plastic for a while, so we will see whether I've looked after my cards. This is always a dangerous thing to do because it's very depressing when you look at a card that you've had for ages and find that it's covered in scratches. But so we will look at this Charizard together and see if it stood the test of time. I don't remember whether there were silvering issues on the edges. There were in some, certainly in base set, you got a lot of silvering around the edges on some print runs of it. But Yeah, I mean, the Cosmos holofoil is very lovely. I think that's held up pretty well. I think that corner might... There's a sort of hint of something. Let's try and see. We'll have a look at it on the other side. Oh, there's a swirl up there. But I don't know. It's held up pretty well. Just don't know what that's... The light was catching on something up there. I can't make... It's a sort of lip almost, but I don't know. Anyway, that was the star card, obviously, as it was in base set. Although this was actually the card that I wanted more than anything, because, of course, it was very playable, and I was playing the game back then. So the more copies of this is probably scratched to buggery, because I probably used it in a deck. But, oh no, it's doing okay. But yeah, of the three starters, Blastoise was by far the most playable card in a deck, as was Chansey and what else? Hitmonchan, Scyther, Wigglytuff. Yeah, there were a few of the ones that were really quite playable cards. Let's have a look at a Scyther, because it's a nice card. There we go. I've used these in decks, so again, it's probably scratched over the years, but oh no, well, it's all right. I've got a lot of these, so maybe this one avoided getting put in a deck. I don't know. I don't remember. So anyway, that is a look at base set 2. I haven't covered it before because it's kind of a boring set, I guess. There are no known errors I can think of that you can look for. It really is very, very tedious. So there you go. That's quite a short video for today.